Ruler School is brought to you by Odyssey Games, where you can go to get singles for all your Force of Will and other trading card games, as well as these amazing patrons.
Extra special thanks to guest lecturer patron Ryan Lilly.
Thank you for your support. Enjoy the video.
Hey there, Rulers. Welcome back to Ruler School. This is DMO73, bringing you another feature match for the week. Today, I am playing the Red ISIS control. It's kind of a burn-style control that was designed by Brandan Bremont. We talked about on the Teacher's Lounge this week. And Paul is playing his take on White, Blue, or Diversity Brunhild. This list was inspired and kind of based off of a list that was sent to us by Mike Nolan, so huge thanks to him. He played this on stream at the Games and Geek recent WGPQ. We really liked the list, so we had him send it to us, and then we made a few tweaks, but it should be an interesting matchup to see how it goes. So we jump right in here with ISIS on the play. Just calls to stone and passes. This deck does a lot of that, especially in the early game. Paul also just drawing calls stone and pass, hitting a dragon ore on the ISIS side. This is the strength counters are pretty much just to be able to awaken the dragon palms. They're not used for really anything else, at least in the main board. Once again, going back to Paul, we just see a call stone, seeing if he's going to do anything with it. Thinking about potentially casting a rune. Not seeing blue in the opening two is not super great for him. So then during the upkeep of my turn, we're going to go ahead, or at the end of his turn, actually, I think, we burn him with Heaven Sundering Dragon Palm for 4, then go into my turn, and out we play the Flame of the Demon King. This is just a guy to sit here and to serve as a little bit of a blocker wall that can also just be used to spot remove, especially if we do things like Eruption and stuff like that. So Paul using Whispers of an Angel there during his upkeep, recovers some life, draws an extra card. So a lot of early game just kind of stall setup for both decks. And out comes the Mephistopheles. So this version of the ISIS deck doesn't necessarily really care about the Meph, particularly because we do a lot of burn damage that can kill it if we need to, and we also just don't play a ton of Resonators in the early game until we just can answer that Mephistopheles outright. So we're going to see the start of that right now. We're going to see a Heaven Sundering Strike come down to burn the Mephistopheles for 6 during the upkeep, and then recover. And at that point in time, we can probably just Sandstorm and clear the Meph off the board. This is great because the deck ideally likes to get to 3 face-up runes kind of as quickly as possible, but also just being really strategic about it so that we can turn on Surtur, we can be able to cast Anubis for 5. Lots of things can happen once this deck reaches rune 3. Knowing that Paul potentially has protection of the Seraphs, protection of the Angels, the thought would be if I use Sandstorm here, I kind of bait it out and then leave myself sitting with quite a bit of extra stuff. Sandstorm would also force him to use it on something that doesn't target, so I could follow it up with potentially an Eruption to still kill him. What we're going to do here is we're going to actually use the Burnt Cooking, which targets him to try to do -4/-4, and that does bait out the protection there. If we had an Eruption in hand, that would have been great at this moment, because also we could have just used Sandstorm plus Eruption to still clear it off the board, even with that +8/+8, and just clear it. We would have not kind of wasted the Fires of the Demon King, though. So we're just going to play a second Fires, leave ourselves with 2 will up, and then that comes to play Chapkas in the Meph, and then say pass. Going into Paul's turn here. This feels very good for the ISIS list at this point. Paul finally seeing a blue source here, but getting rid of the Energize when still not being able to be threatened by damage is pretty solid. We're going to see the IU come down and attempt to steal the Fires of the Demon King. In response to that, though, what we do is we go ahead and Poison Stinger, and we're doing that on the Mephistopheles. So it takes 200 damage, and then any damage it would take for the rest of the turn gets doubled. Seeing if that's going to respond, or if we're going to see an action in response to it, or if it's going to resolve. He does let it resolve, and so what we're going to do instead is we're going to use Burnt Cooking on my little fire, which will kill him. and then it will trigger the fire being able to burn something for 6 damage, which I can burn the Mephistopheles, so he takes a grand total of 12 damage there. And that also means that the Ayu's target is now gone, so the Ayu doesn't get to steal anything. So essentially, Paul just played a 2-drop 6/6. Does have flying, but ultimately, we're probably going to just clear that off the board this following turn. Calling Stone here, hitting another Dragon Ore, going up to 10 strength counters. Having already used one of the Dragon Palms, this is pretty much all the strength counters we'll ever need, which is nice to kind of hit early on, but ultimately we want to be hitting those Stones of Dueling. It's what really turns the deck on to be able to make Isis just kind of go nuts. We are attempting to swing in for 0 here, mainly because we want to make access use of this explosion. So we're going to explosion the fires while it's swinging, killing it, and then the fires gets to then burn the Ayu for 6. This is mainly because we just want to get that rune flipped, and we're doing a pretty good job keeping the board clear, so this just gives us advantage to get a rune successfully flipped face up. Playing the Sand Warrior here, just an 8/6 at this point in time, doesn't have the buff because we haven't hit rune 3 yet. Paul seeing that second Stone of Dramaturgy. Finally can start playing all those 1-drop machines in his hand, like stacking the 1-drop machines in his hand here. See, he's got, looks like double Vivian plus a Guinevere. Down comes the first Vivian. Now the question becomes, does he play a second Vivian here or the Guinevere? Seeing a Blade of Faith on the Magic Sand Warrior, which feels a little weird. Not a super huge threat right now. Maybe potentially because he's worried that I will get to rune 3 next turn while also clearing the board and then swing at him for 12. Deciding to just pass the turn after that, though, despite having a Vivian and a Guinevere in hand, not making advantage of that other blue source. Hitting the Stone of the Hermit here on the left. The deck does play Sand Dragon, so we can use Magic Stone of the Hermit to make that just significantly better. And just, if it comes in off of Surtur, potentially immediately get in the air for 10 damage. Anubis coming on board here. Does have the 3 runes revealed, so it only costs me 5. Burning the Vivian for 1500 damage. There's no response there. It does get removed from the game. So now that Anubis is on board, any card that Paul would send to the graveyard for any reason is going to get removed. Not particularly devastating here outside of being a disruption to Brunhild's Reanimate, but knowing that it was probably just going to get removed pretty quickly, we just force him to have a threat. And since I'm doing a really good job of keeping the board clear early, we use the Anubis to kind of serve as the threat that he wants to use that cheap removal on, and then we follow up with Surtur, who's going to continuously wipe the board and just pump out threats by taking damage. The first Diversity Village coming down here. Only having one other blue source available right now. Probably the ideal choice is to play the Guinevere here, give itself the 2 counters, and then it has 3 types, so it would technically be a 5/7 for 1, but ultimately just choosing the pass. Seeing his hand is all blue at that point, it looks like an Ayu, a Donut Drone, a Vivian, and a Guinevere. So as the Isis player, because there's no board size, because there's no board to wipe, I could potentially play like a Surtur or something, but I don't get as much advantage out of that if I'm not wiping the board while I'm doing it. So it's almost just better for me to wait. So we just saw a draw, call, stone, pass. Going back to Paul. Now with 2 open blue sources, if he can get a third here, he can kind of really go off. There is the 3rd blue source, so we can probably see a pretty dynamic play. So we see the Vivian come down. It has 2 types, so it's naturally a 5/5. And And you see we do have the IU in play there too. The Guinevere is going to come down here, suddenly giving the 2 counters to Vivian, it looks like. Well, we'll see what he decides to give the counters. But now we're up to 4 different types among the different things. We have Wanderer, Machine, Fairy, and Human. So he does keeps the counters on the Guinevere itself. So Guinevere coming in as a 6-8. And then at that point, just passing the turn. I think there could have been merit to playing the IU there just to get more types on board. Potentially, he's just worried about over-investing, though, and getting board wiped back, though. So kind of trying to figure out how, with the Diversity Village, how big things are getting right now. Just mainly to know exactly how to wipe this board effectively. The Surtur coming in 800 damage, doesn't have a response. It is enough to clear everything, thankfully. And then Surtur himself gets damaged by his own effect, so brings out a Sand Dragon. And then we are going to see, like what I talked about before, using that Stone of the Hermit to take advantage, give the dragon swiftness, and then hit him for 1,000 in the air, taking him down to 34 if it connects. Protection of the Seraph's not doing a ton here, other than saving something from being board wiped, because I'm not really targeting much at this point. I do have Whirlwind Conflagration as the Master Rune, so that is definitely something that he can use to save one thing from that combo. The weirdness here is the Diversity deck does run the Mystery Box, but the weirdness is that with Mystery Box, it strangely opens the deck up to being Whirlwind. So thankfully he does have that, he happens to get that protection right there to be able to save kind of the most important piece, because we are seeing the Mystery Box come out and getting a lot of value off of it. So we have 2 Angels of Hope, a Mephistopheles, a Lancelot, and a Guinevere. So ultimately that's giving us 5 types, everything getting very, very large. We're also going to see putting the extra 2 counters on the Guinevere itself rather than the Lancelot. I'm not entirely sure, other than just to survive a board wipe. Technically, he can use the Lancelot anyway, but just by removing the counters from Guinevere, that just leaves her more vulnerable to being wiped in the first place. So hitting 5 Resonators off the top with the Mystery Box feels pretty good, especially with one of them being Mephistopheles, because he is opening himself up to potentially a next turn Diverse Evolution for a lot of different types, 5 different types, and then just swinging in for practically lethal, especially if he follows it up with a Judgment from Brunhild to give everyone flying. So first we're going to go ahead and see if Sand Dragon can connect here. He decides to let that happen. He doesn't block with the Angel of Hope, so he is going to take the 10. Next, we're going to see the other Surtur try to swing in here. Essentially saying, you got to block with something here. Even Mephistopheles, your biggest guy, you're going to have to burn a card to keep him alive. And we are going to see it, the protection of the angels come down here. So it is going to make Mephistopheles big enough to get Surtur, but Surtur technically takes damage, sees himself do that, and so I do get to go get a Sand Dragon out of the deck. Comes into play tapped, ultimately, but I do get to bring that to the field. Now he's tapped out. 4 of his creatures are there. I really don't care about the Lancelot trigger at this point. Being able to kill either of these guys, especially with the card that I'm about to be casting, which is the Whirlwind Conflagration. So the targeting here is really tricky because we have to remember, again, he's got 5 types currently active on that diversity. So we're going to target myself for 2 to get started, and I have to hit 6 more targets, or 5 more targets, to be able to make things the best. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. So this is a little weird. Arguably didn't need to hit my own Sand Dragons at all. Could have just hit the other Angel of Hope, rather than targeting my own Sand Dragon for any reason. Just kind of thinking it was already going to die anyway. That's primarily also because I plan on doing, I have 3 will available, so I can also cast Eruption here. So I'm putting out enough damage that, like, it's going to die anyway. Ultimately, though, I should have just hit the Angel of Hope to sort things out that way. So keep in mind at this point in time, I'm taking 2, Paul's taking 12, the Angel of Hope is taking 6, the Guinevere is taking 8, the Lancelot is taking 10, and the Mephistopheles has already taken 15 damage here. So a lot of things already marked for a lot of damage. So the only thing that actually dies off that Whirlwind Conflagration is my dragon. And then we're going to see an Eruption, which is just going to clear the rest of the board anyway, because everything's going to take 8 damage. The 1 Angel of Hope that remains on the board will also take 8 damage, and then have all of its buffs from the Diversity Village fall off, so it will also just die. So just like that, clearing the board and putting Paul down to 12 life. So ultimately, the mystery box kind of falling a little bit short there. Does kind of just reset us back to the same game state, but seeing as that the red deck doesn't really mind having 0 creatures on board, like we're wanting to try to just keep the board as small as possible on both sides, really. It's better for me, especially since the Diverse Evolution is significantly less important. The Castle is significantly less important, and we've already used a mystery box. Casting Invitation here. Not really knowing what he's searching for. Looks like we are going to see a Brunhild Judgment. Brunhild probably going to be bringing back the Mephistopheles, I imagine, just to say that all of my stuff is going to come into play tapped. So if I'm in Paul's shoes, the card that I search for is either a mystery box. It looks like he searched for a Misty Dragon, knowing that he already has the protection of the Seraphs in hand, or protection of the Angels in hand. Currently sitting at 4 of 5 runes revealed, which means that you see there is a Ruins Beneath the Sand in hand. So that's essentially going to put Paul on a 3-turn clock. Or a 2-turn clock. Casting the Anubis here, thinking about it anyway, or not the Anubis. Yeah, the Anubis coming into play here tapped to try to burn the Mephistopheles. Let's just try to clear it, right? I'm not super concerned about the Brunhild just by itself, knowing that I'm going to be putting him on that 2-turn clock here in a second. He does have the protection to keep it safe, but we have the Ruins Beneath the Sand here. It's going to burn him for 4, taking him down to 8 at the end of turn. Essentially saying that, okay, you have a 2-turn clock to kill me, but the other problem is you also have to leave your defenses up for being able to protect yourself from a board wipe into an Anubis swing, because Anubis herself is also just lethal next turn anyway. So kind of backing Paul a little bit into a corner here, because this version of Diversity, at least the version that Paul is running here, he's not really playing Messenger of the Sun, so he just doesn't have that addition hate. So those Ruins Beneath the Sand are just going to sit there and burn him. So that is essentially him. By playing that card, I've told Paul he has 2 turns, and he has to now try to answer it. by kind of rushing me to death and hoping that I don't crack back to kill. So before the upkeep, we're going to see that optional possession come down to pump it up even higher, trying to just stack as much damage as we can. Brunhild sitting at 12. Anubis, the Mephistopheles currently sitting at, with one type, sitting at 11 damage. So currently hitting me for 23. He has to find 15 damage worth on this turn to kill me here, or be able to protect himself from the burn crackback. Ultimately, though, probably going to just see Anubis come into play, Isis come into play and kind of burn everything to the ground, or just follow it up with, I already have access to a Great Sandstorm in the sideboard, or in the rune deck, so that's 8 damage there to be able to clear things off, with Anubis being able to kill the... also, the optional possession is should be removed from game. We're going to catch it here in a second. But the optional position is not an additional way for him to produce anything because it would get removed from game. But the Anubis being able to kill Brunhild, the Great Sandstorm plus anything else being able to clear everything else off the board, and forcing Paul to be back to square one with a deck that doesn't run swiftness, just kind of punishing him for that position. So this is kind of the optimal turn, and if he doesn't hit it here, he's just kind of done. So Paul kind of looking through his hand, just seeing maybe what kind of cards he can try to find a way to get 13 extra damage. You see we have Guinevere here that adds 2 more. Vivian adds another 1. So now we're sitting on 4 different typings. A diverse evolution comes down, so we'll be able to put 3 more counters on the Mephistopheles if we want to. A little bit of an execution there, error-wise as well. He could have played the Vivian first and then the Guinevere, being able to get 1 extra +1/+1 counter onto the Vivian here. The Vivian actually providing a decent little bit of a buff to be able to remove from, to be able to tap down the Anubis potentially. Ultimately, though, choosing to do the 1 counter on Guinevere, 2 counters on Viv, and then 3 counters on the Meph. Seeing what's in hand here, looks like he still has the Ayu that we've been sitting on, that Misty Dragon Sphere that we potentially went to go search for, and at this point in time he is locked out of Divinity. He's cast 9, I believe. So Brunhild can't kill the Anubis. The only thing here that could kill the Anubis would be using the Mephistopheles to do it. Paul kind of debating where he wants to go, whether to swing at face or not. He does decide to go for the Anubis, and then swings at me for 12. And then at that point in time just leaves it up and says, I hope I can get my stuff to survive through one more turn, to be able to push through for that 26 that I need. During the upkeep, we're going to see the Heaven Sundering Dragon Palm come down there off the top deck, though, burn him down to 4, and then we're just going to go ahead and we're going to try to wipe the board here, just for some flashiness, but ultimately in drawing that Dragon Palm, we have won this first game. Down comes the Surtur, 8 damage to the board. Surtur comes into play tapped. This is another just execution error as well. We're out of dragons. We have 1 dragon left. The other thing, so like the proper execution here would be to play the giant sandstorm first and then the Surtur, so that the sand dragon comes into play recovered. That meaning that we have a blocker for Brunhild, essentially sealing the game that way if we hadn't drawn our burn. It would also mean that the Vivian couldn't possibly tap down the Sand Dragon. But ultimately, we're not really concerned about that because we're just going to wipe the board and then just burn through. And Paul accepts that. And so we're going to move on to game 2. As we go into the next game, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the bell down below so you're notified when all of our videos goes live, and consider supporting the channel by being a member here on YouTube or by checking it out on Patreon for all the cool exclusive perks that come with supporting us. Thank you guys so much. Let's go to the next game. It's game 2 here. Paul deciding to go on the play. First turn, Angel of Hope, hoping to maybe get himself some early game life gain just to be able to survive kind of into the late game if necessary. Down comes the Flamed Sprite, Fire to the Demon King. Paul hitting blue on turn 2, which is nice for him. We're going to see the Energize into... we're not going to use the rune to do it because the 7 damage is significantly more important. We're just going to use Bad Cooking and kill the Sprite that way, or the Angel that way. Calling Stone and passing. Ultimately, again, we're not really too concerned. We do have access to Explosion. Sandstorm's not really going to do anything here because if we didn't have anything during the upkeep. Now, not having another removal spell in hand, we're going to see that Explosion come down just to keep the Angel of Hope off the board. Paul, unfortunately, not having any way to be able to protect it. You know, like a Flourishing Hope or anything else like that. And weirdly sitting at only 1 white source this time. So kind of having to make a decision about what he wants to cast here. He knows that playing an IU while I have Poison Stinger face down isn't the super best idea. I could just Poison Stinger or use a simple 1-drop card to kill my own Demon Fire and then kill the IU in response, kind of just negating his play. So instead he's just going to take advantage of kind of the lull, not knowing that he's not going to face damage, at least for me this turn, to just cast Invitation and go dig for a card that he thinks he might need later. Good cards for this concept would be Misty Dragon Spirit, like the burned player can't really ever deal with, things like that. We're going to see the the ruins come down, and then I'll swing at him for 0 damage with the fire, and then we'll see him burned for 2. In response, he'll just cast Whispers of an Angel, go up to 46. Down comes that Misty Dragon, like I was saying. That card is very difficult for the burn deck to deal with, simply because we don't have permanent stat negs. So like there's really little things that we can do once that Misty hits board to make sure it just stays dead. Really the only thing we can be doing is using the Ruins Beneath the Sand to make the final damage that's getting hit with during the end phase, so that the Misty Dragon doesn't get to come back until the end of his turn, kind of like continuously locking it from being able to attack. But outside of that, there's really not much this deck can do to answer that Misty Dragon. So we saw a Poison Stinger during the upkeep. On the Misty Dragon, we're going to swing in for 0 again for no reason. We're going to do a Sandstorm here. just kind of really, if I'm being honest, I think the Misty kind of wasn't well played around in this turn. If I wasn't planning on being able to try to kill the Misty, so like the Misty's taken 6 damage there, and during the end phase we used that, we used the ruins. We also misplayed when that card was coming back into play here, because again, if it's leaving during the end phase, it's gonna come back into play during his end phase. But I think what happened is we saw Paul, before I moved into, like, in response to the trigger, remove it. Anyway, the execution there is pretty poor. Ultimately, we play around it anyway by just burning it a bunch during his upkeep, so it's going to come back at the end of his turn. But I don't necessarily think that I needed to do that based on when I was killing it. Down comes that Mephistopheles. And then he's just going to allow the Misty Dragon Spirit to come back in. Now, I do have access to Giant Sandstorm here. Ultimately, Giant Sandstorm, again, doesn't kill the Misty because it is 900. But then we can use the Ruins to kill it that way. Instead, we're just going to see Surtur try to answer it that way. Surtur will come in to play tapped. And he's going to try to save the Mephistopheles with the optional possession here, so it does get to survive. At least until the Flyers of the Demon King is going to die, because Surtur hits all resonators, and then we can just burn Mephistopheles that way. So it does kill the Mephistopheles off. Surtur's going to get to trigger. Now that Mephistopheles is gone, we can bring in the Sand Dragon, which is our way to at least trade with the Misty Dragon. And then during the end turn, we're going to use the Ruins to ping Surtur again. So we actually get a second Sand Dragon on the same turn that it enters. One of the reasons why the Ruins Beneath the Sand was so great, because Surtur can survive his own burn plus a burn from the Ruins, and he says whenever he takes damage, I get to go grab a thing. So using the Ruins, you get Surtur, you play a 5-drop, burn the board for 8, and then end up with 2 10/10 flyers with it as well. Knowing what we do for a tap 1 in Brunhild, which is the Blade of Faith, we're going to see that Surtur get RFG'd. He does have the optional possession engrave here, so the Misty would be able to at least win a trade with one of the 2 Sand Dragons, but the other one would be able to then start serving as a blocker for it at least once and hopefully kill it. Paul kind of debating if he wants to swing in and use the optional possession now. Actually just deciding to use another Blade of Faith to remove the Sand Dragon and saying, well, we'll just take care of them all. I know he has the optional possession engrave, and I say, okay, that's fine. I'll make you spend it now. I have another Sand Dragon I can go get, keep myself safe from the 11 damage, and clear things out that way. Down comes a Vivian, and then a Guinevere, setting us up to have a couple more machines. The Misty's going to flicker out and then come back in during the end phase of his turn. Calling Stone with Isis, hitting another Dragon Ore here. I believe I missed putting counters on my Isis with that first ruined burnt cooking. Another Surtur coming down here. I do have another dragon, so I say, okay, well, I have a dragon now to deal with the Misty Dragon Spirit, and I still have the 1 will recovered. So hoping that that's enough. And then again, we're going to see the burn with the Ruins to get at least another Sand Soldier out, so I have this 12 damage heavy hitter. We're just going to see during Paul's turn, saying, you know what, I'll just flicker my Misty Dragon Spirit out here, abandon getting damage for the turn, and then say Odin's Judgment. Just to clear everything off. And then play that Diversity Town and a Blue Leaf. So when the dragon comes back in, it will be sitting at 12, because I'll have 3 different types on the field. Ultimately, in my mind, I probably should have just, again, used the second burn to burn Paul, rather than burning the Surtur. But kind of a misplay there, knowing that he had the Odin's Judgment. So we're seeing an Awakened during the upkeep. Not an Awakened, we're just going to burn him for 4, looks like. Oh no, we burned the Misty Dragon for 5 damage during the upkeep. And we're going to see that Great Sandstorm. Now we can start using the statue to just burn him. Now, if I had been in this position of being able to, remembering to put those counters on, I could have actually also burned him for 4 damage here. But instead, we're just going to take the 4 damage from the Ruins Beneath the Sand and admit that we're probably finally going to get hit by a Misty Dragon here. Misty Dragon currently sitting at 11 because of the Diversity Town. Swing again for just that 11, not playing any other resonators to pump it up, so I'll just take it, go down to 29. Paul deciding if he wants to do anything else during his turn, or just leave up all of that will to be able to potentially mess around with what I'm going to be playing on my next turn, or potentially even at this point in time he is at, I believe, 6. He's at 7 stones, so he technically could cast Mystery Box this turn. I think he was maybe considering whether or not, Calling Stone here definitely has enough for Mystery Box, whether to consider walking into potentially a big board wipe off of another Surtur or another Anubis or something like that. Or even Whirlwind Conflagration, because he saw that in game 2, or game 1. Hitting the 4th Stone of Dueling, I believe. Yep, that's all 4. So now an Isis Flip is particularly devastating, because those 4 stones essentially translate to 16 burn damage a turn if I want to. See the Anubis come in, attempt to burn the Misty Dragon for 15 damage. Just going to go ahead and flicker it out. There's really no reason to protection it. Play a Sand Soldier and then just burn him for 4. And then Misty Dragon's going to come back in. Using the protection of the Angels really doesn't benefit him at all there, because he can just save it for free rather than burning a card when I know I wasn't probably going to kill it anyway. Sitting on, looks like Camelot, Lancelot, Vivian, and a Protection of the Angels. So surprisingly enough, the Camelot here would be a pretty decent play. It would add a third type, so we would be at a 12-12 and then a 15-15, which means I have to essentially pick one. And then I could follow it up. You could play Vivian first, and then play the Camelot, bounce my 2 guys back to hand, and have a board state that an Anubis really doesn't help with. A Whirlwind Conflagration also doesn't have enough things on board to be able to burn any of that stuff, really. Especially since I've already used Great Sandstorm, I'd have to pretty much have an Eruption as well to be able to clear the board. And even at that point, he could just play all of those guys and then swing. I only have 1 will available, so playing Vivian into Camelot here would give him 2 more types, so that he would be able to swing in for 13, taking him down to 16 with the Mystic Dragon, while also bouncing the board back. Let's see. Costs 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He doesn't have enough. If he calls Stone here, he could actually do even more by doing Vivian Camelot into Diverse Evolution and swing in with the Misty for just all that damage, leaving the Vivian and the Camelot even higher and more likely to survive any kind of board wipe that I would potentially try to play. Especially since the deck just doesn't really have any, like, he's already answered the flyers that I have, so he's pretty safe in that regard. Looking at how exactly to execute this, whether to swing in first or play it cautious. We're going to play the cautious route here, looking like we're going to go to combat first. Try not to capitalize on putting more units out, just in case that one that I have is something that he's concerned about. Just take the safe 11 damage, taking me down to 18. Playing the Camelot first here, ultimately execution a little bit out of order, to bounce those 2 units back to hand. And then following it up with the Vivian. So the ideal route here would have been to cast the Vivian first, so you at least get 1 counter on it from playing the Camelot. Ultimately, though, not particularly a huge deal, because again, he has that protection of the Angels, and at this point in time, he has 4 different types, so even the Vivian is sitting at being a 7/7 flyer. He's got a 7/7 flyer, a 16/16 flyer, and a 13/13 flyer. So he only needs to connect with 2 of those to be able to kill me, and practically impossible for me to board wipe at this point. It would have to be double Eruption, and even that would leave him with a Misty Dragon Spirit that he could then Mystery Box to try to get enough types. Like, so there's the, you know, he could do Mystery Box to have enough types there, just to pump up the Misty Dragon Spirit to the point where it can deal enough damage. So, different Anubis from hand coming back down. We do have the Eruption in hand still. Ultimately, though, because of the protection of the Seraphs, if I don't, I have to divide this damage up practically to the point of a 3-way tie. But the problem is then he has the protection of the Seraphs to kind of protect either one that he wants. Could protect the Camelot. Instead, he decides to protect the Vivian, which feels a bit odd, but also at the same time has 2 typings, so it keeps him a little bit safer. And this means that essentially my Anubis didn't get to kill anything. So then when the Eruption comes down here, will flicker out the Misty, and then the Vivian still gets to survive. So she didn't take the damage from Anubis, and then she becomes a base 11/11 plus her 2 types, so 15/15 or 13/13. So the Giant Eruption doesn't stop her. Then Misty comes back in at the end of that turn, and it's enough to swing through for lethal. So at that point in time, we burn him for 4 with the ruins, but ultimately we know that when Misty comes back in, he'll have 2 flyers that I can't answer for more than 18 damage, and so that is going to give the game in Paul's favor. So we'll just see the execution here of the last few steps, and then we'll move on into game 3. So game 3, actually choosing to take the draw with the Anubis, or with the Isis deck. Particularly, one of the reasons why we want to do this is we want access to the Energize, because we are a control deck, right? So having an extra card, having the Energize, knowing that we're a deck that's all about board wipes against a deck that's all about little tiny guys, we don't really care about losing, about wanting to go first. We would rather always be in a position where we can just continually clear the board over and over and over again and have the most cards to be able to do that. So taking the draw here actually works way better in this matchup. So first turn pass, first turn Demon Fire into a end of turn Whispers, go to Paul in turn 2 here. Unfortunately, no turn 2 play, which feels really great for the Isis list, again, because we're sitting on not really having to do anything, and we can just poke him for 0 damage and leave up all of our will to be able to punish anything that he plays. We're not really giving him anything to use his will for, so it works out better in my favor. Down comes the IU here. We're going to go ahead and just Poison Stinger our own guy just to clear it out of the way, and then we can kill the IU in the process. Recognizes that it's on his turn, so we can't use Protection of the Angels there. Knowing that we're already doing a pretty good job, we're going to go ahead and play out this first, and we have 2 will to be able to play with. We're going to play this first Ruins and just say, okay, we'll ping you for 2. We'll answer the board that way. Your board's clear. You're not going to be hitting me for damage next turn. Let's at least start the slow burn here, so that if you try to establish, we can just board wipe and continuously apply pressure. Down comes the Blue Leaf, and then ultimately just a pass. Culling Stone here, hitting a Dragon Ore. Rather than play a Resonator, we're just going to Sandstorm. That'll clear the Blue Leaf off the board. And we're actually just going to play a second Ruins here. So now we're burning him for 4 damage a turn, taking him down to 42. Again, feeling really comfortable with these Ruins because Paul hasn't been applying pressure. So we have access to board wipes, and then every single time one of these things sticks, it's just essentially speeding up the end game. Down comes Vivian, and no second play here. Ultimately, the debilitation of not having the water seems to really be punishing Paul's hand. And just really letting me capitalize. So a third Ruins coming down here. That is all 3 in the deck. So now we're going to be burning for at least 6 damage a turn. And then if I can get 2 more Runes flipped, that actually is 12 damage per turn. So potentially putting Paul on a 3-turn clock based on what runes that I cast here. If he swings, I can use Explosion here to kill, and then next turn just play the Great Sandstorm just to turn it on and tell Paul that he's on a 2-turn clock. Which, in having not done any damage yet, and dealing against a deck that's all about board wipes, is pretty devastating. We're going to see a Guinevere come in. Put the 2 counters on itself. Swing in here. We're going to see the Explosion get cast. Little bit of a misplay here. He could have sacrificed it in response to at least pump up the Guinevere, but ultimately just chooses to let it die. wouldn't really matter. He knows I have great Sandstorm here, and I'm probably just going to blow her out of the way. He's like, fine, that's fine. She can die too. And then at the end of the turn, burning him for 12. So this tells Paul he has 2 turns, essentially. He has this turn that he's on right now, and the next, to be able to deal 4 grand worth of damage, and he's dealing against a deck that is designed to board wipe. He also knows that I have Whirlwind Conflagration available, so if he plays too many creatures, he actually can just lose next turn, because I can use myself and any creatures that he puts out, or any that I play myself, to get up to being able to burn him for 12 with Whirlwind Conflagration, and then at that point he's just done. So he actually just admits that there's no way he can come back from that, and so we're just going to end the game there. So huge thanks to Paul for playing, Mike Nolan for shipping the list, as well as Brandan Bremont. Deck list will be up later this week, and until next time, this is DMO73 saying class dismissed.